This story was submitted to me as a comment in one of my videos. The poster's name is Kiet. Note that there are some grammatical errors which I have corrected. This is the story. I live in Asia and here we're overpopulated. That means most of the time there's always noise, even at night. I work as a programmer and due to COVID problems, I work from home. That's good since I can work whenever I want, wherever I want. Since my work needs me to highly focus, I usually sleep by day and work by night. I always enjoy the silence of the night, but sometimes I find it disturbing. There is one night, about a month ago, when my project is on delay and I have to stay up late. Very late. Usually I'm done and I call it a day around 1 or 2 in the morning, but this time it's around 4 in the morning. Funny thing is, in Asia, a lot of people wake up early. Our houses are close together, which makes the noise easy to hear. Mostly around 4 a.m., you can hear noises from someone unlocking their door, walking, or even cooking. But that night is different. There is no sound. No sound at all. It's dead silent and I don't even know until I hear a tapping sound. The sound gives a feeling of something pointy and sharp tapping on the wood. At first I don't realize it since I'm too focused on my work, but the sound is getting louder. When it caught my attention, I feel like it was coming from my neighbor. I mean, I can hear it good, but not that good. I tried to ignore it, but after a few minutes, it caught my attention again, and this time, I'm freaking out. The tapping sound is coming from inside the house. The sound is moving around the walls, on the floor, and I can even feel it vibrating through my body. It must be said that my house is built out of no wood, or anything wood-like. The sound surrounds me and sends a chill down my spine. Noise is a part of life, and it's too stupid to be scared of strange noises, but this time it's not. Besides the tapping sound, there is no other sound. I'm scared to death. I focus all my thoughts trying to detect where the tapping sound is coming from, while keeping my heart from not falling apart, but there's no way I can know where the source is. I want to stand up and go around the house, but I'm too scared to move. The tapping sound keeps coming for a few more minutes before it turns into a scratching sound. Now I'm panicking. I don't know what to do and my heart nearly gives up. The scratching sound continues for a few more minutes before it suddenly disappears. Just then, I can now hear the usual noise. The neighbor's door unlocking, the sweeping sounds on the street, some people walking, and a few sudden noises when people drop their things in the kitchen. After that night, I never stay up late anymore. I am slowly losing my mind. It's been snowing in town for over a month non-stop. School was canceled and nobody's on the road. I feel so trapped and helpless. Everything came to a head yesterday when I saw her. Anastasia Morzarov, or as we know her as, Ani. Ani had been missing for about a month now, and nobody could find any trace of her. Steven told me what happened that night in the mountains, how he and Jake just left her in the woods, all for some stupid prank. Here I was thinking that she got kidnapped or mauled by a wild animal, but no. The truth, or what I believe to be the truth, is a million times worse. Last night I'd been talking with Kate over the phone about the incident. There was not much else for us to talk about, honestly. We had been stuck in our houses for so long, we were sure our minds were slowly deteriorating. She told me how every night she would just hear a voice just outside her window. But that was all it was. Just the voice of a girl saying, "I'm cold." I'm not one to believe in the supernatural, so I just told her that it was her imagination running wild from being cooped up for so long. Kate was going to tell me I was right, until she paused. She told me that she was hearing it again. That voice. This time, however, I could hear it too. Kate said she'd be right back and put down the phone. All I could hear was static, like something was interfering with her signal. Suddenly, her connection was dropped completely, and I couldn't call her back. I just figured that the storm was the cause of this and went downstairs to watch TV. Our house was cold, even with the heat cranked up all the way. My dad was outside shoveling, which was honestly pointless considering how hard the snow was coming down. I think he was going just as crazy as I was, being stuck inside. I was about to turn on the TV when I heard a knock at our back door. It was soft, almost like whoever was behind the door was actually afraid someone would answer it. I could still hear the sound of my dad grunting and swearing in our front yard, so I knew it wasn't him. It knocked again. Now, I was scared. I ran to the front door and swung it open. I yelled to my dad that someone was around back, and he told me he would go look. I could hear his footsteps in the snow walking around the side of our house. After some time, he tapped on the window and shrugged. There was nobody there. All of a sudden, I began to feel weak, like all the energy was slowly being sucked out of my body. I went upstairs to lay back down on my bed, but when I reached for the door to my room, the doorknob was completely frozen. I panicked, thinking the window in my room flew open or something, and I would be greeted by a giant snowdrift instead of my bed. I pulled the sleeve of my sweatshirt over my hand and opened the door. You know that feeling when you think that you're hallucinating, and for a moment, all time seems to just stop? That's what I felt when I opened the door to the girl standing in my room. My mind was filled with a mixture of horror and confusion as I took a step forward. I called out to the girl, something I instantly regretted when she turned around. Her skin was blue-gray and she had a pair of piercing blue eyes. She was wearing a cape-style coat that almost completely covered up her thin leggings and boots. The most distinguishing factor, however, was her dark gray beret she wore on her head. I knew instantly that this girl was Ani. She looked at me and smiled. "Hi, Margaret," she cooed. Her voice was ethereal and disembodied. I stood there in shock. My heart was stuck in my throat and I wanted to scream and cry all at the same time. But I couldn't. I wanted to hug her and tell her that we missed her, but something about her now terrified me. Ani moved closer to me. "Do you want to see?" I started to regain feeling in my body and managed to answer. "See? What?" I asked, consumed by fear. I never should have answered. I should have ran as fast as I could out of that house with my dad and just drove. Ani was closer now, so close that I could feel her icy breath on my face. "See what they did to me," she said in a low, ghostly voice. I didn't get a chance to respond as Ani's face began to change. Her skin started to rot off the sides of her face and her eyes fell out, leaving nothing but dark, sad, empty sockets. I started to cry and fell to the ground. This wasn't her, but at the same time, it was. "I'm so sorry, Ani," I choked, half-stricken with painful sadness that gnawed at my throat, as well as this intense fear that my life was going to end right then and there. The undead girl, or whatever she was, looked down at me. She put her icy cold hand on my shoulder. "I'm cold, Margaret," she hissed in my ear. Her voice sounded evil, nothing like the sweet girl I had attended school with for 4 years. I looked up into those dead, abyssal eye holes. An eerie, pale blue glow began to emanate from inside her body, like some sort of twisted soul trying to escape. "I'm cold," she hissed again, more aggressive than before. Her grip on my shoulder tightened and I thought she was breaking through my skin. I closed my eyes and screamed in pain as I summoned what remained of my strength to flail my body in hopes that I might break free. I felt the pressure disappear, but the pain still remained. I opened my eyes and searched frantically around my room for any sign of Ani, but she was gone. That was last night. My parents took me to the hospital this morning when I showed them my wounded shoulder. When we got to the hospital, the doctor confirmed that I had a severe case of frostbite. I just told him that I was outside and wasn't dressed properly. I'm not sure what else I could have said. Even that sounded a little strange, as it wasn't such an odd place. Luckily, they told me that I should be fine, which did give me a sense of momentary relief. That feeling has long since passed, however. I'm petrified that the ghost zombie, whatever the heck Ani had become, is going to come back for me. I still don't know how she got in the house in the first place. Hopefully I'll hear from Kate soon. I haven't heard from her since we got disconnected. Every time I try to reach and call her, all I can hear is the same distant ghostly static. These stories were submitted to me by a user named Fuzzy Turtle. The subject heading for the email was the 808 files. Anyways, I hope you enjoy. Story 1. Ghosts of the Room. This story takes place when I was 6, so some of the details have faded from memory. Another note, I had a very weak constitution as a child, so I stayed sick and was prone to fainting when too stressed. My family had always had experiences. We believed it started with my great-great-grandma who practiced dark, questionable things. My cousin followed this, and those things followed us. My first experience that I can remember, it happened on a late evening. My mom was at work and my cousin Tasha was in charge of watching my little brother, Claude, and I. When Grandma slept in the back room, I was sitting on the floor eating my cereal while Claude colored next to me when I felt a cold, almost hand, run down my back. Turning around, I expected to see Tasha there, but there was nothing. Feeling uncomfortable, I turned around, taking my cereal with me, and sat crisscrossed and stared into the adjacent room. The atmosphere around the room changed. It felt static-filled, almost suffocating. The sound distorted, and I watched as long, starved fingers wrapped around the upper part of the doorframe. My brother began to scream next to me, his small, chubby fingers pointing towards the far part of the room. I began to scream with them. They were faint, but they were there, a withering mass of things. Some had faces while others just faded into the next room. I don't remember much after that. I remember the EMTs rushing in and my cousin being rushed out on a stretcher. Her room had several knocked over candles in a circle on the floor. Story 2. The Chair. A little backstory on this chair. This chair had been in my house since my great-grandpa built it. It has been moved from room to room through its years, but the only place I've ever known it to be was up against the wall next to the doorway to the back room. I never liked that chair. It wasn't odd-looking or weirdly shaped. It had that old brownish gold flower pattern that you see on old couches. It started when I was 8. I was old enough to sleep in the front room by myself now. But the problem started after I had a bad dream. Getting up, I made my way out of the room, turning to go down the long hallway to the back room where my grandma slept. In the chair, faintly illuminated by the night light, was a dark figure sitting still. I required glasses, so at first I thought it was my grandma, till it stood up. It seemed to grow till its head was canted sideways from being pressed into the ceiling. I screamed while running back to my room. The next day, sleepy and cranky, I made my way out for breakfast, glancing back to that room in the chair, but the ugly thing was empty. "Des, can you make us some coffee?" My grandma's voice called out from the back. Much to my mom's dismay, my grandma began teaching me how to make coffee and foods at an early age. She even got me a blue step stool to use. As I set the coffee to brew, the front door opened and my uncle and aunt came in. They said a brief hello before making their way to the back room where my grandma was sitting. Getting curious, I peeked around the corner to try and see what they were saying when I felt my body go cold and dizzy. My grandma sat in the chair, but she didn't look like my grandma. Her face was pale and sunken. Her eyes, she had no eyes. She had a twisted smile on her face. Jumping back, I hit the broom and it clattered to the floor from me bumping into it. My grandma, aunt, and uncle came walking in. "What the heck happened?" my uncle spoke. He was a man with a short temper to start with. Picking up the broom and placing it back, I looked up to him. I ran into it by accident. That didn't appease him, but my grandma slapped his arm. My grandma looked normal now. Her face, her skin color, even her eyes were all normal now. Off and on through my years in that house, I avoided that chair and never looked at my grandmother when she was sitting in it, scared of what I might see. Back in 1903, deep in Clifton, there used to be an asylum buried deep within the wilderness of Clifton. Pretty soon after the Civil War, people started inhabiting the area, population-wise around 300 people or so. It was a very small town. Nonetheless, people didn't like the idea of having an asylum miles down the road, so they all got together and signed a petition for the asylum to relocate somewhere else. The petition passed and a new asylum was built, which is known as Lorton Prison, a temporary facility for convicts to stay until they were appropriately sentenced. In the autumn of 1904, the convicts were gathered together and piled into the bus, used to transport them to Lorton. Somewhere during the drive, not far from where they left, the driver swerved to avoid something and the bus had started to tip, and soon was rolling in a terrible collision course. Most of the convicts were injured, but managed to escape the bus and had fled into the night towards the woods. The next morning, a local police investigation had begun, and they began rounding up these escaped convicts. Hours turned into days, days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Everyone was recovered after 4 months, except for 2 people, named Marcus A. Wallister and Douglas J. Griffin. During the search for both men, the police found dead rabbits, all of them half-eaten and dismembered, every now and then along their search. Finally, they were able to find Marcus dead by the Fairfax Station Bridge, now known as Bunnyman's Bridge. In his hand, he held a man-made knife-like tool made with a sharp rock and a sturdy branch as a handle. They thought nothing of it and didn't care how he died, only that he was apprehended and that they no longer had to worry about him. They had a name for Marcus, but later realized that they had named the wrong person the Bunnyman. Still searching for Douglas, they kept finding dead, half-eaten rabbits every so often while searching. Eventually, they went to name Douglas the Bunnyman from then on. Several months passed and the police gave up their search. Everybody assumed that the Bunnyman was dead now, if not gone, so they went about their small-town lives. Come October, people started seeing dead bunnies reappearing out of the blue and started to fear the unseen. Halloween night came around and, as usual, a bunch of kids had gone over to the bridge that night to drink and do whatever kids their age did in the early 20th century. Midnight came around within minutes and most of the kids had left. Only 3 of them remained at the bridge. Exactly at midnight, a bright light came from the bridge, right where the kids were. A few seconds later, they were all dead, throat slashed with that same type of tool that was found next to the other escapee, Marcus. Not only were their throats slashed, but they were cut up and down their chests, gutted like fish. The Bunnyman then hung both of the boys from one end of the bridge with rope around their necks, hanging them from the overpass with their legs dangling in the view of any passing cars. The girl was hung the same way on the other side of the bridge. This happened on Halloween in 1905. After that, they didn't see or hear anything from him for another year. Halloween 1906 was approaching, and parents as well as the teens in Clifton still remember the incident that had occurred only 1 year ago at this bridge. His bridge. The Bunnyman's Bridge. That night, 7 teens were left remaining right before midnight at that bridge. Thinking little of it, 6 remained inside the bridge while one, Adrian Hatla, had remained a good distance from the bridge, hoping to have enough time to escape if the same thing happened again. She was the only one to witness this, a dim light walking the railroad track just before midnight, stopping right above the bridge at midnight, then disappearing at that time. Then a bright flash was inside the bridge. She heard the deafening sounds of terrified screamings coming from inside the bridge that lasted only seconds. Moments later, they were all hung from the edge of the bridge in the same way as the corpses a year earlier. Horrified, she ran home and refused to tell all what she had saw. Just spatters of words mixed with incoherent mumblings that the people of her town had to put together to come up with the story. No one understood it or believed her. They charged her with the teen's murders and locked her up in the asylum of Lorton. In 1913, the same thing happened with 9 teenagers this time, on a Halloween night, once again. Adrienne was still locked up. They dropped her sentence, but it was too late. The insanity had finally conquered her. Even if she was released, she was far too gone to have a life, so she spent her remaining years in the asylum until she finally died in 1953 of reported shock. No one knows exactly what she died of from shock, but supposedly she had died in her sleep, dreaming of that one dreaded night. Perhaps the Bunnyman had finally gotten her. More murders were taking place, however, although after the murders in 1913, most people stayed clear of that bridge on Halloween. 1943 rolls around and 6 teenagers go strolling out on Halloween night. A couple hours later, all of them dead. Same way as the others. Investigations took place, but, as usual, nothing was discovered. 1976, the same situation occurs, this time with only 3 people. The only other incident that occurred since then was in 1987, 12 years ago. Janet Charlotter was enjoying the night with her 4 friends. Halloween night had finally come and they had gone out driving to enjoy the night after invading the children's candy bags. They had settled around 11 p.m. at the bridge, waiting for midnight to come. They didn't believe in the myth, so they decided to see for themselves and were to be the only ones who had actually withstood the Bunnyman. They had waited around an hour or so, and it was nearly midnight when Janet started getting a little scared. They all had been pulling pranks on each other, jumping out of the bushes and screaming, so she was already a little worked up. Midnight hits, and by this stage she is in a total panic. She's almost out of the bridge when the lights get really bright inside. When that happens, her body is halfway outside the bridge. She sees her skin starting tearing at her chest, but nothing is piercing her skin. She manages to finally leave the bridge. Completely horrified, she hits a hanging body and knocks herself out. When she awakens, she discovers that she had been bleeding. She was lucky that the cuts just started and wasn't that bad at all. She left and never returned to that bridge again. Ever since then, she had been seen sitting on a swinging bench on her balcony every morning, just staring in that direction towards the bridge, a couple of miles down. From then on, the story remains untouched and unmoved. It wasn't until recently that I noticed these strange occurrences. They didn't start until that mirror came here from that newly dead Aunt Courtney's. The shadow bared upon my house is undeniable. I have always been a skeptic myself, but it's hard to deny anything when this is all around me, but I can't help but believe. I keep hearing strange noises. I can't even sleep at night. I haven't showered in 4 days. I can't go back there alone by that dreadful mirror. I need to make sure that I'm always with someone. I can't stand even the thought of being alone anywhere near this house anymore. It just kind of started with doorknobs turning harmlessly, but it kept escalating. Doors began opening on their own. The shower curtain would be pulled shut by an unknown force. Then the doors began slamming. Now it's reached a disturbing maximum. I went into the bathroom this morning, and the mirror was completely smashed. Cracks ran through it. Shards of glass were all over the sink and counter. Then I saw the shadow. The shadow of a woman. She was behind me. I was frozen in place by a terrible force, a force called fear. There was nothing I could do but watch. I watched the shadow of the woman creep up to the mirror. She looked in it. I could see her face. She was quite pretty, actually, but then she morphed into this disgusting old lady. I heard my mother calling me from the kitchen. I tried to scream, I tried to get noticed, but no noise would come out of me. Just the rasp of a whisper, and all of a sudden the shadow darted out and I collapsed to the ground. The fear lost its clutch at me. My mother came walking back and asked what had happened, but I couldn't tell her. She wouldn't believe me. Would she? Would anyone believe me? I don't think so. So here I am now, just hiding in my room on the other side of the house, hoping she won't come back. I'm here alone. No one will believe me. I don't know what to do. I just wish that all of this would go away. I feel even if I leave this house that I can still feel that someone is watching me. I took out anything that could possibly give me a reflection. I got rid of my TV, my mirror. I even made a tent in the corner. There's one thing I forgot. That's my laptop. What if the screen could be a reflection?